Would appreciate your time on that. I know it's a little bit of a hassle, but we just have to get through it. And again, because of the makeup of this committee, we are going to go by counties, and then the county transportation department, and then the county planning department. I will lead through the roll call and then the minutes. So you'll do your name and then your name, your affiliation, and then the meeting minutes from last time. And if you wouldn't mind using the chat box for everybody else for just putting your name into the roll, that would be great. All right, it being 1 o'clock and we have a fairly full agenda, I'm going to go ahead and get started. First off, my name is Anthony Cefali. I'm in the Government Affairs group here at CMAP. My boss is Gordon Smith, and you've worked with us for about 5 years now. Thanks everyone for making time for this committee. We have a pretty packed agenda and we have a lot that we want to get through. First things first, that we are going to do the roll and the meeting minutes, and we're going to start alphabetically by county. So first off, Cook County, I know that Susan, you're here. And can I get a vote for approval on the minutes?
Yes, Susan Campbell, Director, Department of Planning and Development for Cook County. And I vote to approve the minutes for November and June.
Thank you very much, Susan. Oh, and yes, thank you for reminding me. That's for the last two. We did not have a quorum for the one before it, so we just need to get those both on the record, and they were both posted with this meeting invite.
Right.
Thank you for reminding me, Susan. And that goes over to Cook Department of Transportation and Highways. I know I talked to Jesse about this. Anyone on from Cook Department of Transportation and Highways? Okay, we'll come back to that one. DuPage Planning. Anyone from DuPage Planning on? And Chris emailed me this morning. He said he could not make it. Is there anyone from DuPage Transportation who made it? Okay, moving on. Kane County, Kane Transportation, and Kane Planning.
Hi, Anthony. It's Jackie Forbes from Kane County DOT.
Hey, Jackie, can I get a vote on the meeting minutes as well?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Anyone from Kane Planning? Okay, moving on. Kendall County. Matt, I saw you were on there.
Yeah, this is Matt Osselmeyer. I'm the senior planner for Kendall County Planning, Building, and Zoning Department, and I vote yes for both sets of minutes.
Thank you, Matt. And someone else try to jump in there?
My mistake. We're covered. We're good. I was representing Kendall County this morning on the Transportation Committee, but.
Is that Troy? I'm sorry. You're breaking up.
Yes.
And you were representing just for, I'm sorry, you were breaking up. I couldn't hear you.
My apologies. I made a mistake. I was representing Kendall County this morning on the Transportation Committee.
Got it.
I didn't know if there was another rep coming for counties. Yep.
Lake County, I think I saw Joe jumped in.
Hi, yes, this is Joe from Lake County. My role at the Lake County DOT is serving as a paratransit coordinator as well as a senior planner, and I vote to approve both meeting minutes.
Thank you very much. Do I have Tom on from Lake Planning? Or anyone from Lake Planning? All right, a number of folks from McHenry. McHenry DOT.
Good afternoon. This is John Paul Diebla, Transportation Planning Manager with McHenry County DOT. And I vote yes for the meeting minutes.
Hey, John Paul, good to see you. Thank you for voting on that. And from planning.
Yeah, hi, Dennis Sackquist, Director of Planning and Development for the county, and I vote yes for both sets of minutes.
Thanks, Dennis. Good to see you.
Thanks.
And that's Will, that leaves Will County, Planning and Transportation.
This is Christina Kapkowski from the DOT at Will County, and I vote yes for both sets of meeting minutes.
Thanks, Christina.
And David Du Bois is on the line, but he is having sound issues on his end. So I can say that yes, David Du Bois is here, and yes, he approves the minutes. And this is Colin Dusing with the Will County Land Use Office.
Thanks, Colin. And thank you, everyone, for your patience with that. We got through it. I see in the chat box, Jesse is here from Cook. So with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. We have a pretty full agenda. We're going to start off with some ON2 2050 plan update work. One moment while I switch the presentation. All right, Laura and David, are you on for this?
I am, Anthony. Thanks for kicking this off for us. And I am going to share a little bit about the 2050 plan update and then kick it to David to give you some more information about the socioeconomic forecast. My apologies to those of you who heard some of this, but not all of this. David's information is new this morning if you joined us for Transportation Committee. But as all of you know, and you can head on to the next one, Anthony, the ON2 2050 plan is everything that guides our work here at CMAP. It was adopted by the board 3 years ago, and it is guided by 3 principles that I'm just going to kick through really fast because I'm sure many of you are very aware of them. So the first is inclusive growth that allows for a stronger, more equitable future. And our region needs to ensure that every resident and community has the ability to fully contribute to and benefit from the economy. Our second principle is resilience, which will allow us to prepare for rapid changes, both known and unknown, and we're definitely experiencing that right now with COVID pandemic. And the third principle is prioritized investment, which we discuss a lot, which is about targeting scarce public dollars to maximize benefits. So that definitely will stay the 3 key principles that will guide us into the plan update. As I mentioned before, ON2 2050 was adopted in 2018. So as a reminder, we are federally required to update certain elements of the region's long-range plan every 4 years, which will mean that the CMAP board, as well as our MPO policy committee, must approve this update by October of 2022. The goal of this work is to meet federal requirements, to adjust data and performance measurements to reflect current situations, and to respond to our regionally significant project requests. So I'm just going to talk for a quick minute about the 2050 work and then hand it over to David to get into some particulars. So the next slide shows all of the required projects that we have to complete in order to meet the requirements of the 2050 update and bring this all together into one story and one plan. As you'll note, there are many different projects that we must first put together: financial plan, the socioeconomic forecast that we'll talk about, performance reporting, and these go into making sure our evaluation of the regionally significant projects are correct. All of these, while they look, logically put here, they are interweaving projects and each impact the other. And so our staff is hard at work at putting all of this information together. It's worth noting that we have a couple of projects that are related but not required. Obviously, the pandemic has impacted us in ways we hadn't expected. While this doesn't change the end result of the vision and the goals of 2050, it it does impact how we might go about that. So our COVID mobility recovery work will definitely be part of our conversations as we look to the update of the plan. In addition, we have been working on a transportation equity framework, and this may also provide some different information and policy information for us as we go into the update. The next one shows you the milestones of the project, as we have already been working on this through the past year, but there'll be significant things happening in the course of the next 9 months with a public comment period beginning in June of 2022. So we have about a year to get all the information prepared, shared with you, and then out to the public. I will spend a quick minute just kind of talking about the different elements. I'm going to go back just one, sorry about that. The financial plan. So the first thing that we'll be working on, and Lindsay Hollander shared this morning with our transportation committee, is a forecast of the transportation revenue. So we will be looking at that and updating the financial plan. And if there's any questions on this, again, we wanted to make sure you had the project manager's information. Since we're not reporting on it today, there still may be questions, and we want to make sure we're making things available to you. David's going to get into the socioeconomic forecast, then I'll round back just to touch base on the other project elements. So I will hand it over to David.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Anthony, can you hear me? I think I got my headset situation worked out. Okay, cool. So hi, my name is David Clark, and I'm a senior analyst within the Research and Innovation Group here at CMAP, and I'm going to talk today about our plans for the upcoming socioeconomic forecast as part of the plan update. I've been involved in the last couple of forecast cycles, and so I'll start out, next slide, please. I'll start out with my obligatory first slide, which is when I say, remind people, why do we do a forecast? And it's because it is a federal requirement. Forecast has to accompany every MPO's long-range transportation plan to a minimum of 20-year planning horizon. And with most MPOs, forecast is a two-stage process where you develop a regional forecast and then break it out into down to the local level based on the current expectations and planned goals. Next slide. So a refresher on what we did last time. For the under 2050 plan, we had 2 contracts with the firm Lewis Berger, one to develop a regional forecast that used traditional demographic techniques along with Moody's employment forecasts to develop regional projections of population, household, and employment. And so the regional forecast included more detailed results than previous CMAP forecasts, including projections at 5-year intervals instead of just a total for the horizon year. The projections were for the entire population. Earlier projections excluded institutionalized groups. This was the first forecast to predict future racial and ethnic composition of the region, and the employment projections were broken out into industry sectors. And so what we had for the forecast last time, we showed the population growing from 8.5 million people in 2015 to 10.8 million people by 2050, with employment expected to increase by roughly 1 million jobs over that time period to about 5 million wage and salary jobs. And for the local aspect of the previous forecast, it was based on a spreadsheet tool that Lewis Berger had developed for us to allocate the regional population to the local level using generalized estimates of local capacity and a series of weighting factors to produce a localized forecast that reflected the policy goals of 2050. Next slide. So since it's a plan update, a lot is expected to stay the same. There will be a few changes, so I'm going to first say what's going to stay the same. We'll be reporting again at regional projections at the same level of detail that I mentioned earlier for the last one. So 5-year intervals, age, race, ethnicity, employment by sector. Summaries will be at various levels: municipality, township, county, community area, and of course, traffic, travel demand model subzones. And the local forecast will continue to be influenced by policy priorities, such as reinvestment in disinvested areas, inflow, and natural resource conservation. Next slide. So there will be a few things different this time around. There we go. So what will be different? The population forecast will likely be lower for 2050 than it was in the previous forecast. The On to 2050 forecast assumed growth in the region over the past decade, which just didn't happen. And so while the official 2020 census results aren't available yet for anything below the state level, we do know that the state did lose population over the last decade. The most recent estimates from the Census Bureau at the county level suggest the region's current population total is at or slightly below what it was in 2010, and more importantly, several 100,000 persons below what the last forecast had us at for the year 2020. So while it's far too early to make any predictions, it's quite possible that the revised forecast will be lower than the 10 million people that we projected in the last forecast. Next slide. So another change this time around is we're updating the overall forecast process so we can do more of the work in-house in the future. So we are working with consultants on both the demographic and economic end of this. We are working with we're working to develop an in-house demographic projection model using the same approach that was used in On to 2050, but having this model in-house means we can more rapidly prepare for forecast updates, and we can use a consistent process going forward. And for that, we're working with the Applied Population Laboratory at the University of Wisconsin in Madison for their subject matter expertise. The economic forecast will be based on regional projections from Moody's Analytics, and we're working with a firm called EBP, who will translate the Moody's projections for our needs and provide us with the means to replicate the approach in-house in the future. Next slide. And will also be different is how we'll be doing the local allocation work. For the local forecast, we will be using a land use model instead of a spreadsheet tool. And so we've been working with UrbanSim to develop this model. It's a microsimulation model, so it works at the parcel level, and it represents choices of individual households, employers, and developers with what we expect to be a more nuanced local forecast. And plan to do a presentation in October where we'll go more in depth on UrbanSim and land use model. So next slide. So just for the timeline, so where we're at now, we're in the development phase for the demographic model with the University of Wisconsin, the economic forecast with EBP, the UrbanSim land use model. All the data is in. It's been estimated, and some initial calibration's been done. We're testing the results. We've got a bit of tweaking to do before we start seriously working with that. So going on, in September, we should have preliminary regional forecasts. And in October will be my next presentation to you all. And it'll include a discussion of UrbanSim land use model and what we hope to accomplish later in the year in the outreach phase. That outreach phase will take place in November. I'll talk about that in a minute. The draft regional forecast should be finalized by December. And then we'll start seriously doing the land use modeling using our updated regional forecast. And we expect to complete that in March for a draft local forecast, keeping in mind everything is considered draft until the plan adoption. And so public comment period, of course, over the summer, and then expect to have the final forecast released when the plan is adopted in October. Next slide. So for outreach, our discussions will be similar to what we did in the On to 2050 cycle, where we spoke primarily folks at the county level and the city of Chicago. And the focus in November will be discussing the draft regional forecast in comparison with the previous 2050 forecast and talking about any revised expectations concerning future growth and confirming our development assumptions with our development database, NDD, which is what we use to track all new development in the region, and that data gets fed directly into the land use model. And so, we will probably be talking to you and also with a lot of municipalities as well, just to confirm, that we have all our data up to date for in our development database. And then in February, we'll be presenting and discussing the initial results. I believe that is my last slide. Thank you. So are there any questions?
Hi, this is Dennis Sanquist at McHenry County.
Hi, Dennis.
Thanks, David, for the great update on how you're going to be proceeding with the revised 2050 population projections. We'll be looking forward to working through that process with you. It seems you're going to have your draft forecasts ready, more or less, or your final ones at least, final draft, about the time the census is actually coming out with sub-state level data. What provisions will there be, or will you be able to tweak the model if we find out that the actual census counts for our counties perhaps at that level, or the city, the region as a whole, are different than the estimates that you're working at? I'm reminded to 2010 when our census population numbers were greatly below the census estimates we've been provided for the last decade.
Right. Yeah, the timing for it is very unfortunate because we are under a fairly tight timeline for producing all of this. But in part of our discussions with the University of Wisconsin, we'll be trying to see if there's a way that we can work it in seamlessly, because we would like to have a more accurate 2020 total. Right now what we have are just from the population estimates program from the Census Bureau, and I suspect those numbers are slightly lower than what we'll see when the official 2020 results are released.
I certainly understand timing is everything, and it's unfortunate, but I do hope that there'll be a way to adjust the model if you find the census numbers are significantly different than the estimates. Thank you.
Hey everyone, there's somebody with who is not muted. There's a lot of background noise. If you don't mind checking to make sure that you are muted. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I'm going to go ahead and add in a couple of the other projects that we're doing on 2050, and if other questions come up for David, we can circle back towards the end. So if we just want to click through what some of the other project elements are, just so everyone is aware that we'll be doing the travel model data development. We'll be updating the forecasts. That will be happening in the next year, and Sarah will be the project manager. We'll be doing system performance reports, an update of all of our performance measures, and documenting the impact on the TIF. Again, Martin will be leading that for us. We have the plan indicators and targets, which we'll be updating that information, and Noel will be our project manager. Our next one, that is, again, one that we assume you will be very interested in, and we'll be spending some more time talking with our implementers over the next year, is the regionally significant projects. I did note this morning that we are sending a current list of the regionally significant projects to implementers this month and setting up meetings in July, because we do need to have the revised project lists in this fall so that we have enough time to take all of these data points and evaluate them before we move forward with the rest of the Onto 2050 plan update. And Terry will be our project manager for that. I think we've got a couple more with the conformity analysis, again, that will demonstrate that the 2050 plan meets the budget that we have for ozone in the region, and Russell is our project manager. We will be updating the TIP, and Kama is our project manager for that. If any of these are interested, again, you feel free to reach out to any of the project managers directly. And lastly, what pulls all of this together is our public engagement, talking to committees like yourself to make sure that we're sharing information about each of these project elements as we move along. We will have a public hearing as was required in the summer of 2022, and Jane is leading that for us as she did for the 2050 plan. Lastly, just circling back around, as I noted before, this is 9 significant projects all moving and interweaving with each other. So staff will be devoted to being able to get all of these done and talking to you over the course of the next year, but we're happy to take any questions or provide additional information that can be helpful to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura and David. Does anyone have any final questions before we move on to the next presentation? All right, that looks pretty good from here. Next up, I'm going to switch over to the Moving Will County presentation. Thank you, David and Laura, for that. All right, we are all set up for Stephen and Patty to jump on in.
Great. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, everyone. It's good to see a lot of old friends who I haven't seen in a while. We're going to talk about the Moving Will County project. And with my background, I guess you could say that's a demonstration of CMAP's transparency. So thank you for putting up with this, taking care of my daughters. So the Moving Will County project is a very large project that is, we're kind of going into the final home stretch. It's been going on for about 1.5 years, and it's composed of 2 main components. One is a truck routing study, which the project manager for CMAP on that is my colleague Patty Mangano, who will talk in a minute. And I'm the project manager for the land use strategy part of it. Next slide, please. So this is a project that the Executive Office of Will County came to us with this project, along with support from other partners in the county, of course, as well as a few of the board members. The work is being led by a consultant team. I think we have an excellent consultant team. It's led by Civil Tech, which is primarily does transportation engineering, but they do a number of other things, and they're the lead. As Patty will explain, CDM Smith has headed up the truck routing study work for the most part. And Ginkgo Planning and Design, which has a lot of experience in Will County, is heading up the land use strategy. And then we've had quite a bit of community outreach even during the pandemic, and Lakota Group has been leading that. And then we have a little bit of market analysis by Valerie Kretschmer Associates. Next slide. So these 2 studies, if you will, have 2 different study areas, but they overlap quite a bit. The truck routing, you can see, is a bit larger, and the transportation land use strategy is a little bit more in this roughly southwestern corner. But then we're also considering a larger transportation area, and Patty might get into that in a minute. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. As Stephen said, I am Patty Mangiano. Excuse me?
I thought I was doing this slide, Patty, but go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, Stephen, if you'd like to.
Okay. Sorry about that. So basically, this project, like I said, Will County came to us and they felt like a great deal of change is going on in the county. I think we all know that and have heard a lot about this. And they thought, here is a good chance to really do it right and try something different that's a little bit more comprehensive. So for these two studies together, we're trying to have a process that's really based on data and community, driven by data and driven by community input. And we wanted something, and the county told us that they wanted a process that was balanced, that really looked at these different interests, whether it's economic development, but also the natural resources, which are considerable, of course, in these study areas, as well as there's a lot of complaints about all the truck traffic down there. So what can be done to improve that? And generally, how can there be a strategy both for truck routing and for land use that really helps with the overall quality of life for the residents of the county? And then also, of course, onto 2050 really recognized how this is the real freight hub of North America, and so CMAP is very interested in what can be done to enhance it and to basically make it sustainable for the future. And then at a very practical level, some of you might know about the Will County Community Friendly Freight Mobility Plan, which was a very popular plan adopted by the Will County Board in 2017. It looked at many aspects of freight. One of the things it said was there needed to be, again, this comprehensive look at freight and especially how it integrated with good land use planning. So now I will pass it on, sorry, Patty, to you.
Thank you, Stephen. And hello, everyone. I am Patty Mangiano. I'm a senior planner here at CMAP in the planning department, and I am the project manager for the truck routing portion of the Moving Will County overarching project. So with this project overview, what I would just like to mention is that this is not a typical truck routing study. It was so comprehensive, and hopefully it will be, I'm thinking, the form and it will make a great template for future truck routing studies. So we could go to the next slide. So we had two truck routing study areas, as Stephen mentioned. We had a north section and a south section, and then the land use portion was for the south section of the county. So the study area and the undertaking was pretty large. We had some really huge lifting here. The study area includes over 31,000 acres, 19 municipalities, and over 2,500 miles of roadway. It's important to realize that the purpose of this truck routing study and the land use project is to help Will County and municipalities guide decision-making, pursue studies at a more local, specific level, and apply for and win future grants. This is these studies are expected to be guidance. They're not quarter or municipal specific. They are guidance in an area that is rapidly growing and changing. And the gist of this project was to at least get everyone thinking in the same direction and thinking about the issues about their own communities. Next slide, please. Like most CMAP projects, this project contained robust community engagement. This was a huge study area. We had COVID in the middle of it to complicate things. And I would like to take a sidebar and say, as Stephen said, the consultant team has been exemplary. They have gone above and beyond in all aspects of the project, and I'm very pleased with them. The community strategy was very detailed. We had a project website. We had various social media. We had 4 steering committee meetings, first in person, then we had to go to virtual. We had focus groups, stakeholder listening sessions, 2 virtual public workshops. We had over 100 people in attendance, which was amazing. And then we have interactive Wikimap's online surveys, both to the general public and also to the steering committee. And then we did have maps and surveys and forms and data and draft reports at local libraries or city halls. So that was really great. And then we also had voicemail. We had a call-in number 2 during the public workshop. So if you didn't have a computer, you can at least participate via telephone. Next slide, please. Okay. So the steering committee and the stakeholder review group, it was important to convene a diverse steering committee, people or organizations that had differing priorities and concerns. And the first part of the list demonstrates that. It's a comprehensive and diverse approach that was taken so we could iron out all issues could be at the table, and consensus could be built. So we had the heavy Will County, of course, land use, and Department of Transportation. IDOT is a major mover and shaker with this, and then we had some trucking associations. We also had open lands, we had Medowin, so we had the environmental groups as well, and then we had the Will County Board, and that was really to make sure we had the diverse input from the diverse population in Will County, and then we had the Center for Economic Development and the Governmental League. So we wanted to get all bases covered to air any differences and to really, like I said, sort out all the issues and come up with a consensus. So this is really a consensus building project. Next slide, please. So as you can see by this timeline, we are finishing up. The truck routing portion is on its way to be completed. The final project deliverable has been prepared and will be sent out to the steering committee for review either this week or next. We'll have that finished sometime in July. And then the land use strategy will finalize in September. They are starting to develop the draft recommendations and that type of thing. Next slide, please. So the goals for the truck routing study are pretty big. The overall overarching reaching goal was that to address the lack of a continuous system of designated truck routes and to improve the safety and the quality of life regarding truck routing in the county. It's important to note that the project is so much more than just drawing a line on a map. Environmental and social concerns were part of the selection criteria. And here we have listed different goals, which was speaking with the community to find out where they want the trucks, incorporating technology such as navigation and GPS, and working with IDOT to get the routes registered. And keeping in mind the social, the environmental, and also the economic activity. And as I said earlier, the project will be completed in September of, will be finalized and go to the, hopefully, Will County Board in September of 2021. It's important to note too that we're having back and forth with the truck routing study and the land use strategy. So both projects inform each other, and that really showed us the value of doing these 2 projects in tangent. And also, I would say, gave a lot of input and also gave a lot of inflection as to a best possible solution to the issues at hand. Okay, next slide. The truck routing study, it recommends specific truck routes, both short-term and long-term. It looks at areas where truck routes are not preferred, and it provides implementation strategies on guidance to enact steps to get the truck routes implemented, how to go about designating truck routes. This is especially important at the municipal level. It provides an investment plan to support truck routing and truck routes. It provides some policy-related issues. The report discusses mitigation strategies and provides livability recommendations. Like I said, this final report draft has been completed, and we will be sending it out to the steering committee shortly. At this time, I'd like to now turn the presentation over back to Stephen, and he will address the land use portion of the project.
Great, thank you, Patty. So the goals for the land use strategy, through work with especially that large steering committee, we came up with kind of three main guiding principles. One was prosperity, that is for all and not at the expense of neighbors. Also, another one is what we call nurture or nurturing nature, community and connectivity. And then the last one is balance. So balancing growth and capacity, and trying to apply or at least encourage unified policies consistently across the county. And so the key goals was on that. It is the land use strategy is, of course, focused on the 167 square miles of unincorporated area, what you see here in white. But also, the hope is to have basically some guidance, a way for municipalities to update their local plans. Many plans in this area are needing to be updated. And so the hope was that this could at least be a helping hand. We wanted to come to some consensus on preservation areas, as well as identify kind of high impact areas that were really key. And ultimately, trying to balance in that truck route network that especially the truck routing study is seeking to improve, and integrating it well with things like those preservation areas and these overall guiding principles. And last, while we are focused on this specific study area in this part of the county, which is roughly focused on the Elwood-Joliet supercluster of intermodal facilities, there is an interest in the county in starting a process that could be offer some models for the rest of the county. Next slide, please. So how we developed, we're currently at this draft land use strategy point in our project, and what we did was, started with those proposed truck routes from the truck routing study, and then created 4 scenarios, looking at where industrial and transportation, distribution, and logistics facilities should go. And one thing I should explain about that is that it quickly became clear, especially from the members of the steering committee, that what they really wanted and what local municipalities wanted as well was guidance on these industrial and TDL facilities more than anything. So we don't have any real housing recommendations or commercial retail or anything like that. This seemed to be what we needed to focus on. So figuring out where that should go and what should be the approach. What is an approach that will work, as well as which areas need to be preserved, and then coming into a draft, one kind of unified draft land use strategy based on what we heard, not just heard, but we went over again and again with our steering committee, and then through our community workshop, we got a lot of feedback, and that's helped us to refine the strategy. Next slide, please. So So in the end, where we are at this point, the strategy for where industrial and new industrial and TDL should be located, it pretty much comes down to really the text on the right. And what the strategy is that new development of this kind should be allowed on parcels with frontage on existing Class 1 and Class 2 routes, as well as short-term Class 2 truck routes. And then there are 4 exceptions kind of to this. And what you're seeing here is not a land use map, and I'm going to reiterate that in a minute when we look at another more comprehensive map. But this is basically giving an indication of what it might look like if you applied this policy. Next slide, please. So one of the exceptions is for parcels with frontage only along Illinois Route 53, Historic Route 66. Those would be excluded and not recommended for new industrial or TDL development. Next slide, please. So then another thing is that through the process, especially our big community, virtual community workshop and all the feedback we received at that and for almost a month afterwards through our online site, there were concerns. You know, what about this? There are these schools in this area. There's a church or residential areas, that sort of thing. And so we've incorporated this so that parcels that are within a half a mile or a 10-minute walk of these sorts of areas, those are also not recommended for new development of this kind. Next slide, Anthony, thanks. And then also local comprehensive plans. It is very important to respect what municipalities have in their comprehensive plan. So there's a number of areas. You see some Shanahan kind of in the northwest corner of this study area, down in Wilmington, for example, and some others where also some parcels were not recommended for new industrial development. All right, one more slide. We're getting towards the end. And then the last is preservation areas. And really, in many ways, what has ended up happening is, for the most part, the consultant team has really pulled together and combined the preservation recommendations that are in a lot of local plans, including, of course, the counties, and showing where there are some significant areas to be preserved. And you can see the list here on the left. I won't read through them all, but one that's particularly has some promise and the consultant team, all of us, are quite excited about is the Jackson Creek Greenway, as we're often calling it, which is that green right in the middle, number 2. I will add, to be completely, again, transparent, is the generational farms. This is something where we have heard different things. There has been a strong push we've heard from many people in the community that there are these generational farms that have been there for many years that need to be preserved. And this is something that has certainly been mentioned in the county's land use plan and others. We are in the process now of having some conversations, some additional conversations, mainly with municipalities. But we've also gotten some feedback, to be perfectly honest, from a few owners of these generational farms saying that they would not want to see any restrictions. They might be interested. Their family has owned it for a long time. The younger generations don't want to take it over. And so they're concerned about restrictions. So that's something we're looking at right now. We'll see where it comes out. Next slide. Oh, and I did want to say really quickly that the preservation areas, in addition to recognizing kind of what was already in so many plans already and pulling them together, we looked, the consultant team, Ginkgo, looked at criteria that's been used in different parts of the country for selection of preservation areas, and then kind of did this breakdown of how these proposed areas kind of fall on these different criteria. You can go to the next slide. And here's, sorry, just one more, and we can actually go to the last slide. Oh, sorry, second to last. So again, this is not a land use map, and we are thinking of ways of which, you know, what we can do to make this clear. This is just I don't even want to say geospatial or a mapped representation. It is a visual representation, though, of if you take the strategy, if you take the preservation areas, this is what I would say it could look like. And as you can see, it includes areas that are in the unincorporated areas, but also taking in what is in local land use plans, municipal land use plans, and kind of trying to piece it together to give some sense of the vision. And as you could have seen earlier, this criteria, or this approach, I should say, it does try to concentrate, or it does have the effect of concentrating areas that would be appropriate for new industrial or TDL development up in that area where the best infrastructure and trucking routes are located. Okay, now we're at the last slide, Anthony. Okay, so I think the real important thing for me to say here is that you can see the near-term action items. Once we will be going into a process probably separate for the two components of the Moving Will County project for adoption or approval. And then for implementation, you can see the sort of near-term action items that we're expecting for the truck routing study, as well as for the land use strategy. And I think now we could take some questions.
Thanks, Stephen and Patty. Any questions for them?
Hey guys, this is Jesse Elam at Cook County. This looks really good. I'm impressed with the work that's been done so far, and I think this is going to be helpful sub-regionally. As you know, we're also kind of working with CMAP on not exactly a similar study, but we'll cover similar topics, you know, in the south suburbs. So we're looking forward to collaborating on that. I was curious about your what the tenor of the conversations has been about truck restrictions, particularly by municipalities, since I'm finding that when the question of trucks comes up at the community level, that's where that conversation often goes. And I can see that, you know, you've laid out class 1 and class 2, future class 2 routes, as well as leaving it sort of undefined in the map as to whether you're looking for trucks to be not preferred or just undesignated. So how have those conversations gone sort of at the local level about truck restrictions?
There have been some communities that have said we don't want trucks in certain ways. And what we did for two routes is no determination, because we didn't want the report to say no trucks here. So we really didn't want to go into that so much as unless there was overwhelming evidence, an overwhelming good reason. We really wanted to stay away from that. And Tom, I don't know if you, Tom Murtha, I don't know if you'd want to chime in on that as well, but that really wasn't the thrust of our study. We wanted more to get the consensus of where should trucks be. And I know that means where should they not be is the flip side of that.
Well, Patty, this is Christina from the DOT in Will County. I can speak to that. The county's position, and we've always, the way we've represented it, just in general to our municipalities and our townships, is that we want to be a united front as to where the trucks are supposed to be. And for years since the TDL industry took off in Will County, the general consensus has been that trucks belong on state routes, whether it be state marked arterials or on the interstates. And so that's really has been the driving force behind a lot of this. When it gets down to more localized stuff, we have to explain to folks that yes, you may live on the route, but as a county highway, it's also a regional route, and there are some of these county highways that are going to have to be freight truck routes. But for the most part, we're trying to keep our philosophy has been trucks belong on state or higher, or basically county or higher facilities.
Thank you, Christina, for that.
I'll just add that I mean, there are a lot of restrictions on truck movements in Will County already. So that was how the county regulated and the municipalities regulated truck movements largely. But then that didn't provide necessarily a lot of good information to truck drivers. So one of the innovations, one of the changes that IDOT has recently implemented is allowing communities and counties to enter truck restrictions on the IDOT website for which they have jurisdiction. Will County has in fact taken advantage of that with their highways. So you know, it is important for communities to have some of these restrictions in place. That wasn't the focus of this study, but it is important to recognize as part of the whole suite of tools that communities have available. But you know, the other part of it is if communities are restricting truck routes or restricting truck traffic, they should do it in a coordinated way so that so that a restriction doesn't end at the community border and the next community over has a truck route. So what this plan does is lays out how these routes are supposed to fit together between communities.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for that additional information. And I guess it's appropriate to point out right now, talking to Jesse in Cook County, CMAP has underway the South Cook truck routing and community study, which we are looking at towns within suburban Cook County to do a truck routing study. So Jesse, I look forward to working with you and your team on that.
Thanks everyone for that. Any further questions on this presentation? If not, we will move along to our next presentation. We have more on freight for everybody. So one moment while I get that queued. And Elaine, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present today, and looking forward to giving you an update on the Chicago Rail Futures 2 study. So just to know, as we start out, the name is Chicago, and Chicago DOT is the lead agency on this study, but we are looking at impacts of rail beyond that within the whole CMAP region. So just want to make sure that when we're talking about things, we are talking not just with the city of Chicago. My name is Elaine McKenzie. I'm with Cambridge Systematics, and we're the prime consultant on this study, contracted to Chicago DOT. Go to the next slide. So just a little bit of background. This is listed as a second study because there was an original rail study done in the late 90s that was really one of the first efforts to look at the economic impacts of rail to the region. It looked at the importance of Chicago and the Chicago region to the regional and national economy, and really looked at different scenarios and found that there was huge benefits to investing in Chicago's rail infrastructure. And so this study helped make the case for the creation of CREATE. Throughout the CREATE program, which has been in place for about 20 years, we've periodically looked at the benefits of both investments made and investments that need to be made. In 2013, the CREATE partners undertook a review of
the village administrator, please.
Finding that $31.5 billion of benefits with costs of less than $5 billion. So you don't need to be great at math to know that's a really good benefit cost analysis number. However, if you are familiar with federal benefit cost guidelines and
hello, this is Jesse Elam with Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways. I had a meeting with you actually earlier this
Jesse,
week
Jesse,
about some issues with trucks on Penny Road. I just wanted to follow up. You had asked a question at the end of that meeting about what turns out to be an Invest in Cook grant to build.
Jesse, you need to, oh, thank you.
Sorry, my internet's a little slow, but I was able to get to it. Sorry, Elaine, you can carry on now.
Okay, that's okay. But usually don't get comments already, so. But as we're, part of the study is we want to not just look at the economic benefits and impacts, but rail has a lot of impacts to communities, businesses, and folks in the region. So this study is really wanting to go beyond that, both updating the information that's really important in terms of economic benefits, but also really dig into the impacts to local residents, businesses, and users, and overall put together information that supports the local and national conversation about rail investment and position the region to make more equitable and effective decisions about rail investment. Next slide, please. So many of you have seen these numbers or similar. Chicago is a huge port in terms of the national economy. Just most of it's on rail instead of on container ships. But about half of the intermodal rail containers and a third of the rail cars in the U.S. do go through Chicago. And that's not only things coming to and from our region, but things going to other population centers and markets throughout the U.S. Next slide, please. But as we know, that rail has local impacts as well, and as we've talked about, and you all talked about with your constituents and fellow agencies throughout the years, a lot of the impacts and negative side effects of rail and freight in general are felt at the local level. One of the interesting conversations that we've had throughout this study so far is that many people are concerned not necessarily about rail itself as much as they are of the secondary impacts like trucks on the road that may be a result of increasing intermodal centers, for example. And so we are digging into some of these impacts. Next slide. We're investigating equity in a number of different ways. We're reaching out to people to talk to them through interviews and focus groups. We did put out a survey of community impacts of rail that I'll go over some of the findings from in a moment. And then we also begun looking at some numbers and undertaking an analysis to understand where are populations that are possibly most impacted, excuse me, by rail and intermodal facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, here we go. So one of the analyses that we have ongoing, and this is just kind of an overview slide, is looking at, again, who is impacted by rail operations. So if you see on the map at the right, the orange smudgies are basically half a mile from rail yards. So you have the city in blue, suburban Cook County in red, and then the rest of CMAP geography is in gray. And you can see that the impacts, while primarily located in the center, are spread throughout the region. On the left, we look at the demographics of who lives within these orange regions. Again, if you look at the blue lines, it's the city of Chicago. The first darker line shows the city as a whole. The second line shows those folks that live within those half mile of rail yards. So similarly with the red lines, we're looking at suburban Cook County. So we have the county as a whole compared to those that live within half a mile of a rail yard, and similarly with the collar counties. What we found that is overall people who live below the poverty line are concentrated, people who live in these half mile boundaries are more likely to be below the poverty line, and this is true throughout the region. People who identify as Hispanic or Black, according to census data, are disproportionately represented within these regions as well. And this is even more pronounced when you get into the suburban areas outside of the city of Chicago. So you can see that by those tall red and gray lines on the last two bars, looking at Hispanic and Black population. Next slide, please. So another way that we're trying to tackle who and how people are addressed by rail issues is we put out a survey to ask community members, organizations, elected officials, and others, many of you or your colleagues at your agency should have received this survey, to understand kind of what are the biggest issues related to rail in your community. Next slide, please. We asked 6 categories of questions and also asked respondents to rank the categories in terms of which are most important, as well as ranking things within each question. So, as we hear time and time again, and not surprising, safety comes up as the top category. Health and the environment, traffic and vehicle movement as well, seen as very important. But I do want to say that the answers did vary by geography and type of respondent quite a bit. So depending on where you live and how you interact with the rail and freight system, your answers the answers that we got to the survey were quite different. So that was informative as well. Next slide. Again, safety was ranked as the highest priority category. We're showing in this table on this slide, and on the next slide you'll see similar tables. The categories or the responses are ranked based on which were most important to residents or community members. And I should, that's about 250 respondents in terms of community members. We also had about 60 responses from organizations such as CMAP, county government, local government, or transportation agency. And this is true throughout the different categories, is residents, overall, the folks who responded to the study were really focused on some of the secondary transportation, such as the increase of trucks on the road that may be related to just more freight movement in general. Next slide, please. Health and environment was ranked as the second highest category. Large trucks kind of dominated the concerns that people had, although it was noted that rail is a contributor to this as well. And CMAP gave a great response to this question, really encouraging focus on air pollution because it is a major issue to quality of life, particularly with marginalized residents. Next slide, please. And here you can just see the ranking of what we saw in terms of health and the environment. So again, especially with community members, large trucks really dominated what their particular concerns were. and trucks and trains overall were seen as more concerning than freight facilities themselves. Next slide. And I'm just going to go a couple more. I'm just going to go through these categories pretty quickly and hit some of the highlights. Again, with traffic and vehicle movement, trucks were seen as the biggest issue, and more more prevalent across the board basically than issues due to trains. I do want to note, and especially because I know Tom Martha is going to talk about rail crossings in work that CMAP's doing in a few minutes. The response that we got, particularly related to rail crossings, varied a lot. And one conclusion or one interpretation of this is it really depends on where you're located and if you are seeing these impacts, because they are in some cases very localized to specific communities. Next slide. In terms of economics, one of the things that we found is that and again, this varied by location, whether people found that they could access a train station within 15 or 20 minutes of their house. So, getting at the equity issues related to transportation access. And then that's another thing that we want to dig into a little bit more. Next slide. Pedestrian and biking, again, this was something that really some respondents saw as a very important issue, and others, may not have as much, maybe they don't walk or bike or know people who do, so they think about it a little bit differently. But again, truck volumes were seen by the respondents of the surveys as kind of the critical issue related to biking and not feeling safe biking or walking. Next slide. And then finally, land use. This was seen by most responses as less important or less on their priority list than the other categories. However, what did really come out is particularly in areas with a lot of viaducts, conditions under railroad viaducts were seen as a big issue, and that was kind of the #1 takeaway from this category. Next slide. So just a quick timeline. So we are kind of still in the first part of this study. We'll be continuing more stakeholder engagement, both on the equity piece as well as reaching out to businesses, users of the rail system, and continuing to work with you and other elected officials and community partners throughout the study. We'll also be undertaking a series of research papers that will be kind of an interim product of the study, as well as economic modeling and analysis that will go into the final report that is projected for 2022. I think the last one should be next slide should be my last slide. Yep, and again, just contact information for Jeff Schreiber, the lead at Chicago Department of Transportation, and myself. Thank you again for the opportunity to present, and I'd love to take any questions.
Thanks, Elaine. That was a great presentation. Any questions? Please follow up with Elaine if you need anything. And if anybody wants more information, please feel free to reach out to me after the county's committee. I'm going to turn it over now to Tom Murtha, and we are for our last agenda item. Tom, are you there?
I am, and I'm hitting the share screen, and nothing seems to be happening.
Sharing, you are now a presenter.
Okay, okay, great. All right, thanks so much. I'm going to start off. So I'm going to try to go through these slides really fast because the meeting ends in 15 minutes, right? But I have a lot of them, and most of them are an update of our prioritized crossings list. and that the suggestion that Anthony had about talking about freight and crossings, and this was really timely because as it happens, IDOT had asked us to provide an update of the priority crossings for their rail need study, which is now now just beginning. And I'm going to send a link. There it is, and it's in the chat of a blurb that part of a blurb that IDOT put out about the study. They're asking for stakeholder feedback with regard to rail needs in the region, and you can complete their survey by June 14th. The website again is illinoisrailneeds.org. Again, that's in the chat. And again, it was really what kind of generated some of the work that you're going to see here today. Background. What we're going to talk about is just an overview of what we're talking about with grade crossings, an update of the prioritized projects, and then what we're doing to study some of the projects that we have prioritized. So Northeastern Illinois has a lot of at-grade crossings with the railroad system. Here's a little map of where those crossings are. Many of the places where railroads cross the streets in Chicago were separated by ordinance back in the 19th century. But as development suburbanized, the crossings tended to be at grade. We have a policy that we will reduce grade crossing delay in the region, and we have measurements and a target that we have set for the year 2050. And there it is. But that target is measured by average delay. And what we've found with some of the work that we've been doing of collecting field data as well as information collected along the EJ&E when it was taken over by the Canadian National Railroad, is that a lot of crossings are blocked for very long periods of time. So there's there's the average delay, which might be 8 or 9 minutes for a freight train, a couple minutes for a passenger train, but then sometimes those crossings are blocked for long periods of time. Those locations tend to be very concentrated. At least that was the indication that we got from the EJ&E. We don't have measurements everywhere, but this is what we've tended to find. But you see, some of these crossings are blocked for more than 10 minutes, more than once a day. So it is an issue, and is something that we are trying to address. And those at TC this morning may have also heard Sriraj from UIC talk about this at a crossing in Dalton, where there's extraordinary levels of blocked crossings. We prioritize the crossings based on the information we had, using numerical measures. After the numerical measures kind of had about 150 crossings identified as being where most of the delay was occurring, we did a detailed look at those with a group of colleagues from our public agency partners, and the result was 47 prioritized locations, crossings or groups of crossings. At this time, we are considering, in addition to the list, random hops across the Canadian National Railroad in Kane County. And we're not doing a comprehensive update to this list, but if there are crossings that local communities have identified as particular priorities, where there might have been a change over the past few years in either traffic or the number of trains or train operations, I am happy to listen and consider those crossings as part of a revised list. Again, Randall Hops is the only crossing that we've had so far where we've received a formal request to add it to our prioritized list. And that project is in a phase 1 process now. Let's see. So we have looked at the existing priority list and done an update of what's happened over the past couple years since the list was originally published. You'll see a number of these. I'll just go through them very quickly. Studies have continued. Construction, you see on 75th on the 75th Street project has begun. Preliminary alternative identified for 95th Street in Chicago. On Devon and Caldwell, a planning and environmental linkages study is being initiated. Progress on some of these projects. Barrington is expected to go to construction in 2023. Doberman Road is mostly funded. Right-of-way acquisition is underway, but again, they're looking for additional funding there. Let's see. Planning is underway on Burnham Avenue in Burnham now, and Grand Avenue planning has commenced. There is a $24 million program allocation from the ICC for that project. Old McHenry Road, likewise, $12 million has been programmed by the ICC. Laraway Road, project that I'll discuss in detail shortly, programmed for $20 million by the ICC. A couple other construction programming items here, and also in Berwyn, Riverside, Pell study is being initiated there. Program grade separation 18. So with this priority list, CMAP has again initiated a couple of Pell studies. One is wrapping up and one is just being started. I'll talk about the one that is wrapping up. And this Pell process is, in our view, very amenable to grade separation projects, because often the grade separation studies that we have prioritized are in fact very difficult from an implementation point of view. They're in developed communities. There hasn't been a lot of previous study on the projects, but using the Pell process, we can do what amounts to a planning level process, but use the results of that planning level process to inform the NEPA process. So thereby we accelerate the project timeline. The planning and engineering work is aligned, and we have a better opportunity for community engagement through the Pell process, following federal procedures than we would through a typical feasibility study that isn't carried forward to engineering one. So the Pell process has allowed us to move forward through public engagement, an initial survey, and a final Pell meeting, a public meeting, to develop a purpose and need, alternatives development and evaluation, and the identification of alternatives to be carried forward. You can't select a preferred alternative within the Pell process, but we are really doing a lot of work that can be carried forward into that phase 1 process. And once the Pell report is approved, that Pell report is good for 5 years to be carried forward into a phase 1 study. So again, you don't lose the investment that you've got. Typically, a phase 1 process is programmed for about 6 or 7 or 8% of what the construction cost is. The Pell process, we are spending a few $100,000 on our Pell studies, and this enables us to get to a point where we have a go or no go decision for these projects at a fraction of the programming money that would be tied up in phase 1. And this is very critical for these projects in urbanized areas where we don't actually know whether we can get a project that we can carry forward. So stakeholder involvement, key element here for these projects. And with that stakeholder involvement, we identified a purpose and need. Again, the purpose and need what essentially was to reduce delay, correct safety issues, and improve freight network reliability. The project that we're working with is in the heart of an industrial area that we just heard about from the Western Will County truck routing and community study. So this is in fact on a class 2 truck route between Quarry, Vulcan Materials, and the Union Pacific Railroad's Joliet Intermodal Terminal. So the alternatives that were carried forward include intersection improvement along Route 53, and there are several configurations that we're looking at there, as well as improvements along the route. There is a proposal to add an additional lane along Laraway Road for part of the project. It wouldn't extend to the western limits, so the effect on travel demand is minimized, but the operational impact when we're introducing a grade into the road with heavy truck traffic, trying to allow people to pass those slow-moving trucks going up those hills, and also to align the traffic with left turn lanes at the approach to the Route 53 intersection, where we've got a lot of delay forecast through the year 2050. So lots of issues here, but this is these are some common design elements for all of the alternatives we looked at. We looked at 4 alternatives that you see listed here, and the route that was the alternative that was selected was the Laraway Road over Route 53, or Laraway Road over the Union Pacific Railroad alternative. We see that's on the left, and the roadway impacts are in blue, the railroad impacts are in red. That alternative simply had many less impacts than the other alternatives. There were utilities, drainage issues that we had to address, access issues. Every one of these grade crossing projects is complex, and the road over the railroad in this case minimized the complexity that we look forward to as we go into phase 1 and construction. Some of those issues are again summarized here in this little chart that shows the level of issues for each of those alternatives, and this just gives you an indication of some of the construction and what this project might look like moving forward to implementation. So that concludes my update of our grade crossing work, including updated information about the prioritized projects and an idea of how the Pell process can be utilized to move forward with these prioritized studies. I'm happy to answer any questions now or by email or phone. And it is 2:29. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions on this before we wrap up? With that, thank you everybody for taking the time today. The next meeting is in October, following the Land Use Committee. Of course, we try to switch between following Transportation Committee and following Land Use Committee. This was a thing that happened when we were back in the office, so hopefully we are back by then. And I look forward to seeing you all. Have a nice weekend. Thanks, everyone.